welcome to Voices for Energy Justice, a podcast series produced by Uniting the Central Coast for Action, a program of the San Luis Obispo Climate Coalition.
Shalonda Baker's visionary book, Revolutionary Power, provides two critical insights. One, we cannot address climate change without also taking on environmental justice. Two, the powers of the status quo will try to divide climate activists and the energy justice community. Overcoming this is the key to achieving the energy future we all deserve.
Listen in as John Smigelski interviews Selena Feliciano, the National Campaign Coordinator for the Energy Democracy Project. She is specifically leading the REFOCUS campaign, which is short for Reimagined Energy for Our Communities US.
Energy democracy to me means a future where everyone across race and class has the opportunity to not only make decisions about where their energy comes from, where it's extracted from, how affordable it is, but also live in comfortable homes with energy that supports their ability to live through the seasons.
Hi, Selena. Thank you for taking time for this conversation. We spent some time together on the steering committee for the California Alliance for Clean Energy, and I really appreciated your many contributions. I'd like to start this conversation by having you share some of your background and what attracted you to the energy justice work.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks, John, for having me. And it's great to be able to stay connected, even though I'm no longer on the board, but still very much in the same fight with you. I think my entrance into energy democracy and energy justice came from many years of wanting to be so much deeper in intersecting of the work and the work. And I say work and the work as in work with the lowercase w and work with the uppercase W. And the work of the lowercase w is like the work that pays the bills. It's work that might change over time. It's work that generates income, maybe puts away some savings. And then your uppercase work is like your life's passion and the thing that gets me up in the morning. And I think energy democracy for me is that beautiful intersection of those two types of work. I went to school a number of years ago, and I was deeply involved in cooperatives and cooperative structures. I lived in a co-op. I wrote my honors thesis on cooperatives and sustainable business models. And exiting school, I was looking for avenues to continue cooperativism, but I wasn't quite able to find a spot where I could get hired or join a cooperative easily. So I ended up interviewing for and getting a position in a big renewable energy company. And I was there for about 4.5 years, and I learned a lot of skills while I was there, got to work with some really cool people. And at the same time, I recognized that my work of the lowercase w and the work of the uppercase W wasn't quite matching up in that position. And around the last year of my time in that company, I joined People Power Solar Cooperative as a cooperative member. It's a co-op here in Oakland where I live that supports everyone, including renters, to take advantage of residential solar and get the benefits of residential solar and also organize within a cooperative structure. And that really opened up my mind because I was like, wow, I could not only deepen my passion for cooperatives, but I could also use the skills that I've developed in the renewable energy space and have them intersect and have it be really aligned with my politic. And so a number of years later, I've landed here at the Energy Democracy Project, continuing that intersection.
Yeah, it's great when you can get the small W work and the large W work get together. It sometimes doesn't even feel like work sometimes.
Right? Yeah. I feel really blessed to be in a space that feels so life-giving in a lot of ways. And also it feels affirming that I'm working towards a future that I want future generations to thrive in alongside so many awesome people.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about the Energy Democracy Project, and you in particular are working on the REFOCUS campaign.
Correct. Yeah. So the Energy Democracy Project is a network of about 40 organizations that are spread all across the country, from Alaska to Puerto Rico, who are working towards the same vision of energy democracy. It's a decentralized, democratized, distributed, diversified energy future. It's a lot of different types of organizations with many different priorities. And a number of years ago, back in, I believe it was 2020, during a virtual convening of the collaborator organizations, they really started to tie the threads together of their work in recognizing that the struggles of what was happening in Puerto Rico were very similar to what was happening in Cleveland, were very similar to what's happening in Oakland, where I live, in Detroit, pretty much fill in the blank in so many cities. And they really wanted to figure out ways to amplify the shared struggles and also the mirrored stories that a lot of folks held. And that paved the way for the REFOCUS campaign, which stands for Reimagined Energy for Our Communities US. And I was hired in 2022 as a national campaign coordinator for the REFOCUS campaign, steering the development of our resources and tools, and really guiding a large narrative campaign to support people in making those threads and tying those threads together of stories all across the country for energy democracy.
So you're talking about diverse number of different groups from across the country. So what's your unifying definition of energy democracy?
Energy democracy to me means a future where everyone across race and class has the opportunity to not only make decisions about where their energy comes from, where it's extracted from, how affordable it is, but also live in comfortable homes with energy that supports their ability to live through the seasons. And that to me are systems that are democratized, are systems that are decolonized, specifically in their connections with the land, moving away from extraction and towards regeneration, supporting land back efforts. It also means having it be distributed away from a monopolized energy grid like the one that we see into a grid that's actually held in the hands of the people with diversified energy options that reflects the different needs of communities all across the country.
Yeah, yeah. As we see technology evolve, that ability to have energy in our hand is possible now. Technology is beginning to allow that for individuals and for communities, and it's a very exciting and important time for people to be focusing on energy democracy. So I recently attended a webinar of yours, which was what is energy democracy? And it brought together advocates from across the country that shared their stories. Curious, what kind of themes do you see on a national level? What kind of things you see in common, that really resonate with you, the common threads?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one main common thread that I'm seeing is that a lot of people recognize the system we currently have is not working. Where I live here in Oakland, we have Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, as the investor-owned utility. And we face blackouts, we face wildfires that have been caused by downed power lines. We're facing rate hikes every year, sometimes multiple times per year. And in stories like the ones that were shared during the What is Energy Democracy webinar, where we heard from speakers in Maine, in Mississippi, and in Massachusetts, there were a lot of those same sentiments shared. It's people who were really starting to take a stand against the investor-owned utilities and try and pave the way for a new type of energy future. And one of the exciting things for me that I really love, because I also love talking to people and just learning a bit more about how they landed in the places that they did, is that a lot of people come to this work from different angles. Catherine Robinson down in Jackson, Mississippi, who spoke during that event, came to it from a place of wanting to engage people as voters and supporting the empowerment of community members who had for so long been disenfranchised specifically within the framework of the rural electric cooperative systems. Gregory King, on the other hand, who came and called in from Boston, Massachusetts, came from it from a place of financial empowerment and supporting the economic development of communities. And specifically in Massachusetts, taking advantage of some of the incentives for residential and rooftop solar, looping those into cooperative structures and having those be some really innovative ways of helping people not just save money, but reinvest dollars in ways that feel so much more aligned in the future they want to build.
Yeah, I mean, it's so great when communities can actually financially benefit from the energy that falls on them every day, as opposed to having to pay for it from the utilities. I was struck by the fellow from Maine who talked about you referred to that campaign in New York City for a while with the rent's too high, that we really need the electricity's too high campaign. And I think in California that's really the case, and it's spiraling. Utilities are really aggressively pursuing rate increase after rate increase after rate increase. I think over the next 3 years, they're averaging something like 10% they're asking for each of them. And it just adds and adds by, 7 or 8 years, the rates have doubled. And, who can really afford that? It's very, very, it's very unfortunate. So when I look at your website, I see there's a lot of great materials for people that are involved in this issue, and there's opportunities for people to sign up for your REFOCUS campaign. I assume you're still recruiting people?
We are. We're actively and heavily recruiting anyone who wants to join our efforts.
Yeah.
A lot of our call to action really centers around Puerto Rico, because that was really the flame that lit the fire of the REFOCUS campaign. Ruth Santiago, one of our collaborators who lives in Salinas in the south of PR, brought her story to light during a virtual gathering of collaborators. She spoke of the heavy rate increases faced by Boricuas. She spoke of the hurricanes, where for months on end after the landfall of hurricanes, people were left without power, leading to the deaths of thousands of people after Hurricane Maria in 2017. Talked about corruption. She talked about the inability of people to make decisions over their energy sources, with there still being coal-powered plants in PR. And a lot of people, in hearing these stories, can start to pretty easily identify some mirrors there with the stories of what we're facing wherever we're living across the country. And so we bring people together through the story of Puerto Rico, asking them to stand in solidarity, amplify that story, and also support others in starting to share how these mirrors continue in our energy system all across the country in our stories. And when we can better understand that the problems around our energy system are not just relegated to a particular zip code or even to a particular state, it's really a national issue or even international issue when we consider the full scope of extraction to distribution and transmission, then we can really crack open what a new reimagined energy future can look like, where it really does reflect the necessity for us to have much deeper connection with the sources of our energy and how energy is being used too. So we guide people to our website, energydemocracy.us/refocus, where they can learn a little bit more about what's happening out in PR, how they can sign on in solidarity, and then also how they can get access to some of our resources to make it easy to share stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, and now Southeast United States has just been devastated by a hurricane that's really destroyed the infrastructure. The resiliency is going to be really difficult, and they're going to have to rebuild this. They're going to face the same way the same issues that Puerto Rico had to face, and it's quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge.
Absolutely. It's really heartbreaking to see the images coming out of North Carolina in particular, where we're seeing some heavy flooding and, yeah, really devastating impacts of hurricanes. And it's spooky how closely that mirrors so many hurricanes that have been becoming so much more intense just in the last decade alone. And I think you're right. We can learn a lot of lessons from the post-disaster recovery of Puerto Rico, of cities in Florida, in Texas, and a lot of places that have faced um, hurricanes and other natural disasters. And the reality is, for a lot of people who call those places home, building back is hard, and building back stronger and more resilient is even harder. And the unfortunate thing right now is that the US government doesn't necessarily think about building back stronger and more resilient as energy democracy, or distributed energy resources, or resources that are really going to be able to withstand hurricane. In a case of Puerto Rico, and we see this as well in New Orleans and in other places across the country, after hurricanes, they rebuild the grid as it was before. And we know that that's going to fail time and time again. And community members are demanding a different sort of future.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many groups in California that are raising that call for a different system, energy justice. And I was curious if any particular lessons you learned nationwide that you think would be applicable to California. I'd love to be able to do what the fellow from Boston is doing, but the CPUC, is the California Public Utility Commission, just passed regulations that just makes it financially not viable to do microgrids or do any of that kind of work. I'm curious what kind of insights you might be able to suggest.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really powerful organizing happening across the country. I think one idea that pops into mind is just the act of getting people together and supporting them and getting more informed about our energy system. And the reality is, if you go down the street, you go to your neighbor, you walk around the block, and you ask people where their energy comes from, most people don't know. We're so far abstracted from the processes of how energy lights up the light bulb in our bedrooms or in our kitchens. And so I think that that's a real missing gap when we're trying to organize people, and people not necessarily understanding who the players are, how the system works. It's going to be really hard for them to understand what a reimagined future could look like without knowing what the context of the now is. So I can point to a lot of different examples of that across the country. I think, to reference Catherine once again, down in Jackson, Mississippi, she's come up with a really awesome ongoing, essentially a leadership academy of people who are paying the bills to their rural electric cooperative and are interested in getting more involved in understanding the energy system, and also potentially one day running to be part of the decision-making body of the cooperative. So that's one side of things. I think another side of things is we're seeing some really interesting campaigns popping up across the country. One of them was from the What is Energy Democracy webinar as well, Our Power Maine, where that was a ballot initiative that brought the voters into a place of decision making around what a different energy future could look like, having them answer the question of whether they wanted their system to move away from an investor-owned utility and into the hands of a public agency. It was a really big campaign, and unfortunately, they were up against a very well-funded investor-owned utility counter. But I think that there is something there, and I can't say for certain why the ballot failed. I think, speaking to the organizers, they could probably share a lot of lessons learned, but I might imagine that one of the big keys or one of the blocks that they had was that a lot of people maybe didn't know where the energy comes from or how investor-owned utilities make their money. And so there must have been a big push for educating the public before the ballot initiative came out. So yeah, I think we've got a lot of work to do to get more folks in that place of feeling informed.
Yeah, so they have to know where their energy comes from, and they have to know there's a better way that's available now. And so they have to know both things. And yeah, it's if there's initiatives, say in California, there'd be a lot of money involved, and the money would come from the ratepayers to convince them not to do anything differently.
Right. Right. We
Which
are
is
up against some big players.
an incredible irony that, arguing in many ways against the interests of, say, customers with rooftop solar is financed by all the customers. And it's bizarre, but it's what it is. Looking at California, what kind of needs, what do you see that needs to change to have success in California?
Hmm. A whole, I don't know, get all the politicians out of there and bring in some people that are actually beholden to community.
Yeah,
Take down the CPUC, take down the investor-owned utilities. Here in California, we've got the three big investor-owned utilities. We got PG&E, one of the richest companies in the country. We've got San Diego Gas and Electric, and we have SoCal Edison. And they really have the commission wrapped around their fingers. And politicians as well, our legislators aren't really making decisions in favor of community. Over the last few years, we've had the big question around the cost shift and this idea that rooftop solar on residential homes is subsidized by non-rooftop solar customers, which frankly is a whole bunch of bunk because the investor-owned utilities every single year are recording record-breaking profits while they increase our rates. And as you said, they're using our money to then lobby against us and perpetuate false narratives and myths like the cost shift. And a big challenge that I'm hearing from collaborators and colleagues who are on the legislative floor, speaking with legislators, is that one, a lot of these legislators don't come from energy backgrounds. So they come into their position and the first voice of energy in their ear is coming from the big corporations. It's not community. And then two, when a question of rates comes on the floor, a legislator is incentivized to vote in favor of a false narrative like the cost shift because it benefits their public persona, both in the eyes of the investor-owned utilities who can continue padding their pockets, and then also in the eyes of uninformed constituents who might also fall prey to the false narrative of cost shift. And so the legislator can say, okay, I voted to make sure that you weren't subsidizing rooftop solar customers. Meanwhile, they're abstracting a whole slew of lies that the investor-owned utilities want to make sure never gets out. So I'm not sure if that answered your questions, but
well,
the political landscape of California is one that is so complex and really needs quite a bit of transformation.
yeah, I agree. It's kind of like all the above, and heartened that there was some good bills put into the California legislature this year that were really progressive, and a reasonable number of bills. Unfortunately, not. I don't think any really good bills made it to the finish line. We stopped some bad bills, but I think the governor just vetoed the one that would allow schools and renters to benefit from solar. I mean, took that away. It was really very disappointing. But yeah, the cost shift is one that's it was created several years ago by the utility industry, and it's been propagating around the country. And to me, it's like when I think about it, so are you telling me that if I turn my lights off, I'm hurting a poor person? And that's clearly not the case. But that's the extension of this cost shift. By running solar, you're hurting poor people, and it's just not the case. Many more benefits occur from rooftop solar or customer-owned solar than the like, by reducing transmission costs and distribution costs, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, we do have our challenges in California.
Absolutely.
So let's imagine your future energy future. If you were in charge, what would it look like? And and do you possibly see a path forward?
Well, I think one, if I was in charge, I would make sure that my power was decentralized. I don't want one person or one agency making the decisions for everybody, because that ends up in turn perpetuating the very same issues that brought us to the place that we're at in the first place. It really should be communities making the decisions for themselves, because we know what it looks like when the power is out. We know what it feels like when it's the heat of the summer and we have blackouts. We know what we want pollution of our energy to look like. And most of us will say we want no pollution. And where I live, here in West Oakland, we get pollution from the Port of Oakland. We've got a lot of diesel-powered trucks rolling through. We've got energy in so many different forms that are bringing in pollution to my neighborhood. And so if I'm to speak to what I want energy to look like for me and my community, it's an energy system that first and foremost supports a community where everyone can thrive. It's not just rich people who have the rooftop solar. It's not just people who live in a particular zip code. It's folks across race and class who can walk outside their front door and guarantee that they're breathing clean air, that they're able to keep the lights on, that they're able to keep heat going in the middle of winter. So I really want to root my reimagining from a place of lived experience, of knowing, like, what does energy system feel like to me right now? And what is the counter image of that that's going to bloom so much more? And if I'm to think about the sort of technical aspects behind that, it is the distributed energy resources that are going to be much smaller than what we're seeing now, where PG&E currently has, yes, renewable energy, but it's renewable energy that's built out hundreds of miles away on sacred lands in the desert. Then it's brought over via power lines inefficiently and then sent to my home. Rather, I want to know that my energy might be coming from maybe it's rooftop solar. Maybe there is a solar and battery combination that's held in a community center down the block, or maybe it's a school that's around the corner from my home. I want energy resources to be held not just in private hands behind a fence, but in communal hands, in communities' hands. So it is more resiliency hubs. It is more power on public buildings, like our libraries, like our schools, like churches, places where people naturally congregate, so that folks are that much more interacting with their energy resources. And then I want an energy system that is in right relationship with the land. So it's not just all about us and the air we breathe. It's also about redwoods. It's also about the waters. It's also about this beautiful bay that's not too far away from my home. Our current energy system is so extractive and it leaves behind so many people. And that's why just transition is not just about switching from renewable energy or switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy. It's really about transforming our entire relationship to energy so that We're not using energy for military. We're using energy for thriving communities. We're not using energy to transport energy across hundreds of miles, but we have energy right here from the sun around the corner. We're using energy for that future that we all want.
Yeah. Guilt-free energy that helps build our communities, the wealth of our communities and our individuals. It sounds like a wonderful thing. We have to get there. It is the technology is there. We have to move it forward.
Yeah, I hope
Appreciate your vision.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are my prayers. And I think one big contradiction that we don't often address in energy organizing is the reality that solar technology is also extractive. A lot of these technologies require the extraction of lithium or precious metals, from communities that are halfway across the globe that we might not be thinking about or interacting with on the daily. And so I think in that process, from here to there, of the now to that reimagined energy future, there has to be that deep reckoning of the reality of that extraction and really considering a process that allows for the folks in those communities to have a real say in our energy future as well, because what's happening in the Congo is absolutely linked to my day-to-day in Oakland, even though I might not be seeing it. It is there, and the battery in my car relies on those communities. And I think that's a big question that I'm grappling with right now. And that was brought up because you brought up guilt-free. And I think in this moment, I still feel some guilt, and I think that's something that we have to address and transform that shame into addressing.
Yeah, the concept someone brought up previously was sacrifice zones. We have to eliminate these sacrifice zones for everyone, and not just us, but downstream of where this energy comes from. But I get it. It's hard. It's a real challenge. It's a real challenge.
It is, but that's what we're here for.
That's right. That's right. So I want to just kind of close with what message you have for others. You've given some great visionary concepts and but anything else you'd like to add or to get other people involved?
I'd love to add that the energy model, as we know it today, of the investor-owned utilities hold over our energy system is a new one. It's only existed in the last 150 years, maybe even less than that. Humans have existed for far, far beyond investor-owned utilities, and we will exist far beyond investor-owned utilities. And so what I love to share with people is that another future is absolutely possible. There is another way, and we can have an energy system that not only serves us, but serves our planet and serves generations to come. But it has to start with the seedlings of imagination. If we think that investor-owned utilities are going to continue their power hold forever, it's really hard for us to get out of that paradigm and into that place of building the new. So I hope that folks that are listening to this maybe draw a drawing or engage in some movement or close your eyes and step into that imagining, because we need that creative energy. It's really easy to get stuck in the technicalities, but sometimes we have to allow ourselves to play, and that's when new visions can really be planted as seeds for the future.
Yeah, and now is the time. Now is the time that it has to be done. It has to happen now. It's the
More than ever.
urgent issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciated the conversation with you.
Likewise, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. We are interested in your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. Email us at john@slowclimatecoalition.org Tell your friends about this podcast series so we can all grow together. Till next time.